go for your dreams no matter what, and don't let anyone tell you you can't, because they will believe that until you show them that you can. Hello, my friends. Welcome to It's All Magic. I am your guide, your host, and your friend, Devin Hine. And here we'll be discussing how to make your life truly feel like magic. I believe that our very existence on Earth is nothing less than a miracle, and that we all have so much potential to learn, to grow, to experience, and to create during our short time here. It is both my passion and my pleasure to walk this path of life optimization by your side, where we'll discuss topics like passion, purpose, intuition, manifestation, physical well-being, and much, much more. I'm a yoga teacher, a meditation and breathwork facilitator, and a national board-certified health and wellness coach. But more importantly, I am an eternal optimist, a lover of life, and a forever student. It is my hope that with each and every episode, you too will finally start to believe it really is all magic after all. Ready to dive in? Let's do it. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be back here with you for another weekly episode of It's All Magic. My first question for you today is, how are you doing? And not how are you doing as in we're at the grocery store and I said, how are you? And you say, good, thanks, you. And I say, good, thanks. And we go about our day. I mean, how are you really? So I'm just going to give us a quick moment to kind of check in with ourselves. I'll guide us through maybe 3 deep breaths today. If you have the opportunity to take these deep breaths, whether you're walking or driving or just washing some dishes, I invite you to join me. I find that we could all use a little deeper exhale more times than not. So whenever you're ready, I invite you to first just empty out any oxygen you're already holding on to. And then when you can, take a deep breath in through your nose, filling up all the way. Open your mouth and let it go. 2 more just like that. Deep inhale through the nose, filling up. Open mouth, let it go. Gorgeous. 1 more. Make it the deepest yet. Inhale, breathing in all the way. And open mouth, let it go. Amazing. You can flutter open your eyes if you had gotten the chance to close them. So I'll ask you again, how are you really doing? And sometimes you can feel it within your body. Sometimes you can sense a little bit of anxiety in your tummy. Maybe it feels a little like butterflies, or maybe you feel a little bit jittery, whether it's from anxiety or your morning coffee. Maybe you're feeling really excited today and you can just sense this lightness, this levity in the air. Maybe you're feeling a little bit down, whether it's a little sad or lethargic. Whatever it is, I just wanted to give us a chance to truly check in with you and make sure you're at least aware of how you're doing so that you can then decide what you need. So maybe you need to go for a little walk and get some fresh air and sunshine. Maybe you need a cuddle or a hug. Maybe you could use a little food to ground you. Whatever it is, I want you to find what works for you. Listen to your own body, listen to your own gut, and take that thing. So with that, we will move into today's episode. I always say this, but I'm so excited for today's episode. I got the coolest opportunity to watch one of the most magnificent speakers of all time speak very recently. I got to see Dr. Jane Goodall speak, and she blew my socks off. When I say that she is one of the strongest, most self-assured, and inspirational speakers I have ever heard in my life, I am actually not exaggerating. She is incredibly down to earth. She is sweet. She is thoughtful. She is funny. She's kind of like lighthearted and goofy a little bit. She's not what I expected her to be. She's not some scientist in the way you think of a scientist. You know, she's very cool and hip. So I had a fantastic time listening to her. It was an event in the city in San Francisco near where I live. And the event was called Reasons for Hope, which, if you know me, whether in real life or even through this podcast, you know that there's nothing more that I like than hearing reasons for hope in the world. And I'll also preface this whole story of the night by saying that I really got to experience something called a glimmer at the event. Maybe you've heard of glimmers. I feel like this word is kind of hip and trendy right now. A glimmer is essentially the opposite of a trigger. So if a trigger tends to bring you pain or sadness or anxiety or trauma in some way, a glimmer is a little moment of joy and hope and bliss. Almost like, for me, it felt a lot like moments of synchronicity. So I'll start with one of those glimmers. I was going to say glitters, which is even better. Let's call them glitters. So we get to the event, and I'll say that Cal and I on that particular night, it was a Friday night, we were so tired from the week. We'd had a really busy week trying to balance our full-time corporate tech jobs with podcasting, which I do have to say there's a lot more behind the scenes than you could ever even imagine. So we'd had a really busy, fulfilling week. And by Friday night, when it was time to get all dolled up, pack up some dinner, and go to the Jane Goodall event, which is, about 45 minutes or an hour away for us with traffic, we were not really feeling it. And we actually contemplated, should we not go just so that we can rest? What do we need? But we kept saying, no, this is going to be a really incredible night. And granted, given her age, she's about to turn 90 in April, which is just unbelievable when you see her speak. We thought we really want to see her while she's still here. And that might sound a little morbid, but she's not going to live forever. And I really, really want to see her. So we ended up going, and thank goodness we did. How many times in your life have you, I don't want to say dreaded going to something, but not been in the mood to go to something, and then when you're there, or better yet, when you leave, you say, oh, I'm so glad we went. I feel like that's the case more times than it isn't. So let that be a little message for me, for you, for all of us, that sometimes, yes, we want to stay in our comfy clothes, we want to stay in our cozy little home, but if you just push yourself out there, you're probably going to have an amazing experience of some sort, whether it's a party, an event, whatever. So we finally get to the Jane Goodall event, and when the curtains finally opened, it was actually not Jane Goodall on stage. It was this man named Charlie. I didn't catch his last name, but he said that I believe he was one of the co-founders of the WCN, which he said is the Wildlife Conservation Network. And he has been really close friends with Dr. Goodall for 20 plus years. So she had asked him to do the introduction for her. And so he's on stage and he's just telling some stories about her. And in all of them, of course, you can't help but smile, kind of getting to know her personality and her quirks and her sweetness and her charm. So he started by saying that recently she was asked to speak for this annual Salesforce kind of conference or event. And they had some amazing speakers at this thing. So they're sitting in the green room, kind of the prep room backstage for all the speakers. You have Matthew McConaughey, the Dave Matthews Band, Governor Newsom from California, and Jane Goodall. And of course, her good friend Charlie, who's just sitting there with her. And he said, with all of those people in the room, the only one anyone wanted to speak to was Jane. So if that doesn't say something incredible about her, I don't know what does. And I was talking to Cal about, why would that be? And we thought, Jane, when you think of Jane Goodall, everything that she symbolizes is doing good for the world. I feel like, I could be biased, but I feel like she's not a very controversial character. Almost anyone on any side of the political spectrum could look at the work she's done and said, oh, she's trying to help people, animals, and the environment, which actually she ended up teaching us later on in the night that if you help one, you help all. It's all the same at the end of the day. So anyway, I love that everyone only wanted to speak to her. They didn't care about Matthew McConaughey or Governor Newsom. They just wanted Jane. And then after that Salesforce event, Charlie and Jane were walking back to their hotel. He said their hotel was 2 blocks away. They were stopped 7 times by people that just wanted to thank her for the work that she's done and for the inspirational and good acts that she kind of spreads throughout the world. And he actually, when they got out to their hotel, he said, Jane, why do you think people love you so much? I mean, I get it. I'm a great friend and a great fan, but what do you think? She said, I don't know, but I think it's magic. And right then, I looked at Cal and he looked at me, and we both had the biggest smiles on our faces. So if that is not a glimmer, I don't know what is. Obviously, his podcast is named It's All Magic. And so for us to arrive at this event and within the first 5 minutes hear, I think it's all magic. Oh my gosh, we were beside ourselves with excitement. So that was how the whole evening opened. And I thought even her answer was so sweet. It was so humble. She was saying that when she finally got on stage, that she doesn't know why so many people are magnetized to her and drawn to her, that all she's ever done, this is kind of in her words, is follow her heart and do her passions. That's it. She never tried to be the best at this or have some sort of massive legacy or spread her name. She just always followed her heart and her gut, which is a huge theme that we will find in today's episode, just based on the stories of her life that she told that I will be sharing with you all. She is really a huge advocate for following your heart, dreaming big, not letting anything get in the way of you and your dreams. If you fail, try and try again, and you will get there. And so that was truly just what drove her through her entire life story. And so when I hear the question of why do so many people love Jane Goodall, it's because we can feel that. You know, we can feel when someone is being so truly authentic to them and they are following their heart and they are living their childhood dreams and they're trying to do good in the world. There's nothing more we could ever hope for, you know, for our children, for ourselves, for our friends and family. That is, I think, the epitome of a life well lived. So with that, let's go into some of her really fun stories. So the first thing that I found incredible is that at the very beginning of her speech, she said that she almost doesn't feel like she deserves all of the accolades and attention she has received. She thinks the one who really deserves it is her mother. She said she would not be where she is in life. She would never have accomplished everything she's accomplished if it weren't for her mom. So Jane was born in 1934 in Hampstead, London, England. And, you know, it was a very poor, difficult time to be born, to be alive. And she said because it was around, you know, the wartime, World War II, her father, I believe, was off at war. So she said she didn't She didn't really know her father that well. They weren't very close, but her mother was all she ever needed. So from the time Jane was a young child, she had this natural love for and affinity for animals. And so her mother tried to just fan that spark of curiosity. So her mother would get her Dr. Dolittle books, even though they really didn't have a lot of money. And Jane would spend, hours and hours, total bookworm, just completely immersed in the world of Dr. Dolittle with all of the animals. She just loved animals. And when she was 4 years old, she said, her and her mom went on a little family holiday to a farm. And of course, this blew little Jane's mind. She loved seeing all of the farm animals. And specifically, she was obsessed with the hens. She had never seen hens. And when she was taught that hens lay eggs, she walked around asking her mom and the other people on the farm, what hole is big enough for an egg to drop out of? She was so curious and obsessed with this question. She wanted to understand, how do these hens work? How do they lay their eggs? And so she, in her little Jane brain, got an idea that if she could quietly observe the hens so that they didn't know she was in their little hen house, that maybe they would lay an egg for her. And so what she did, she crawled into one of the little hen houses and she curled herself up into one of the corners, stayed completely silent for 4 hours. 4 hours. And finally, one of the hens laid an egg and she was just, in another world, on cloud nine. It was the coolest thing she'd ever seen. Keep in mind, she's 4 years old at this point. And she had just observed this hen for 4 hours. I don't know if that's normal for most 4-year-olds, but something tells me it's not. So at this point, she runs inside the house to tell her mother what she has seen. And her mother had been so beside herself with grief, thinking that Jane was gone. No one knew where Jane was during those 4 hours. Her mother had almost called the police when Jane comes bursting through the door. And what Jane said this night at the event is that in that moment, her mother had the choice to either berate her for having disappeared. How dare you? You never go off on your own. That was 4 hours. I was so scared. Where were you? Or she could make a different choice, which is what she did, which is that she saw the little twinkle in her daughter's eyes, saw that Jane had had some moving experience, and she sat down and she said, Jane, tell me, what was your afternoon like? Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you learned. And so Jane said, in that moment, a little scientist was born. So it is because of her mother's reaction to that entire situation that Jane said it kept her curiosity for observing animals alive, rather than having been ridiculed for patiently waiting for this hen to lay an egg and not telling her mother. Obviously, next time Jane, should have told her mother. But Jane said that made all the difference in the world, that she knew that her mother supported her and saw her for her interests and her dreams and her desires. So for that alone, she said her mother essentially created Jane's entire life from that moment. So a little bit later, they get home from the holiday, keep living their life. And one day, Jane stumbles into this little bookshop that she said she used to spend every single Saturday afternoon in. And I believe at this point in the story, maybe she was 8 years old, maybe 10 years old. And she said, again, they really didn't have a lot of money, but Jane would send up every cent she had so that she could go to this little used bookstore on Saturday afternoons and look for a book. And of course, they were always books about animals. That's all she ever cared about. And so She goes to the bookstore, and she said that the bookstore was a complete mess. It was in total disarray. She would have to kind of climb over the piles of books just to find one worth reading. And on this particular Saturday afternoon, she's looking around in the piles of books, and she finds Tarzan of the Apes. And as she said at the event, no, she had not seen the movie at this point in time. A television wasn't even invented yet. And she took the book home, completely devoured it. And it was on that day when she was, let's say, 8 years old, that she became obsessed with the idea of studying wildlife in Africa. It was on that day that Africa became her dream. And she did say her one qualm with the whole storyline and the book is that Tarzan married the wrong Jane. So we loved that. I mean, she's honestly a hoot. I love Jane Goodall after this event. So she was telling us about that story, Tarzan of the Apes, falling in love with the idea of wildlife and Africa. And she said as she grew up, and she would tell people that her dream was to go to Africa to study wildlife, they would say, "Wake up, Jane. I mean, you're a woman and you're poor. How are you going to get to Africa? We women don't have those kinds of opportunities. You're crazy. Dream a little smaller, be realistic, grow up." So that's what she heard from everyone except for her mother. Her mother always said the same thing. She said, work hard, take every opportunity you're given, and if you never give up, you will find a way to get there. And with those words of wisdom, Jane started really believing that her dream could be a reality. And so, again, Jane kept reminding us that the only reason why she was ever able to have the experiences she did, especially back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, is because her mother supported her no matter what. So there's more to the story about what her mother has done. So beyond just supporting her in thoughts and words, her mother actually joined her for some of her field work. So later on in life, when Jane was, I believe, 22 or 23, she was given the opportunity to go study chimps in Africa. And a little later, I'll explain how she even got there, because it's a whole other magical story, but it's kind of in a different theme. So I have it a little later. So she's given this opportunity to go study in Africa, but at that point, the British government still ruled most of these African countries. And the British government mandated that Jane had to have someone with her when she went into Africa, because it would not be safe for a young woman to go there alone. So her mom volunteered to go with Jane. And Jane was explaining how, they were staying in the worst environments. It wasn't terrible to Jane because, granted, as she said, this was all she had ever wanted. But for her mother, who, would not have willingly chosen to go live in a tent with spiders and snakes and baboons in the middle of a jungle in Africa, this was a big deal. It was a big sacrifice, and it meant everything to Jane. And she said that, they had to live in this tiny little tent. And unlike the tents that we have now that have, kind of the bug net so that you can open let's call them the windows, you can get some airflow. She said if you wanted any airflow in these hot, humid, sticky jungles, you had to roll up one of the walls of the tent. But when you rolled up one of the walls of the tent, suddenly snakes are coming in, spiders are coming in, baboons that can smell your food are coming in. And think of baboons for a second. I'm picturing the ones in Tarzan, of course. But she said they have these huge canines. They're kind of scary. Actually, not kind of, they're terrifying. And so she said her mom made all of this work because she would not let anything stand in the way of Jane accomplishing her dreams. And she knew that her daughter wouldn't get this opportunity unless someone went with her. And so her and her mother are in the jungle, and the government then decided that they didn't think it was very safe for these two, young women to be in the jungle alone. And so they assigned a cook to live with Jane and her mother. And this part was so funny. She said, there was nothing wrong with the cook except that he had been fired and kicked out from every single British family he had ever worked for. And it turns out it's because he had an alcohol problem. And when the British government was assigning this cook to Jane and her mother, they said, well, it's okay because you don't have any alcohol on you. And Jane and her mother said, you're right. Okay, this should be okay. So the cook comes to live with them. Jane said within 2 weeks, the cook had learned to make some sort of really intense and potent fermented banana drink that got the cook completely drunk. Every single day. And so as she's telling the story, she's laughing a little as she's thinking about this horrible tent filled with snakes and spiders and baboons, this inebriated cook, her and her mother just trying to get by. And yet, even with all of that going on, Jane was in heaven. One last really cool thing about her mother. Her mother, who not only was, in Africa to support Jane, she was only there to support Jane, but she decided to do something with her time when she was there as well. And so she actually started working as a healer. And Jane said her mother was not a doctor or a nurse. She had not been trained in any way, but she knew some old home remedies, things like soaking in an Epsom salt bath or saline drips, just various things that have been passed down from, family to family, parent to parent, or parent to child. And she was so successful healing some of these people in Africa that people would come from all over Africa to meet with Jane's mother to be healed. And so Jane was saying that she's just in awe of her mother, that, she also must have had some insane self-assurance, because here she is in the middle of an environment that she's completely uncomfortable in. She doesn't know the languages around her. She's in this sticky, kind of dangerous environment, and she still decides, I am going to do good while I'm here. And so just right now thinking about how we learn so much from our parents, it makes sense why Jane is the way she is, that she is destined and obsessed with doing good in the world because her mother was as well. So far we have talked about magic in the beginning, where she said, I don't know why they love me, it must be magic. Now we've talked about mother. We're sticking with the M's here. Next, we're going to talk about manifestation. Now, granted, I say that, but take it with a grain of salt. Obviously, Jane Goodall was not talking about manifestation in her speech, but through her story, which I've written down in my journal and I'll chat you through in a second, I found so many moments of manifestation practices in a way. You'll see. It's more that she had the mindset to manifest all she ever wanted. So that's what I want us to adopt based on her story. So the first thing that she kept talking about over and over is essentially this idea that things just happen as they're meant to. Follow them, flow with them, and keep going in the direction of your dreams no matter what. But also understand that things will not always work out exactly as you wanted them to, and yet in the grand scheme of things, they work out exactly as you want them to. So I'll tell a little of her story and you'll see how that is a common thread. So after high school, she said, most of her friends went off to college, but she herself could not afford college, not by a long shot. So she actually moved into downtown London, took a secretarial course and started working as a secretary. And even as she was explaining this, she was rolling her eyes. She did not want to take the secretarial course. This was clearly not up her alley, not really her thing. But she needed to make money. She just needed to have, quote, a real job. So she does that. And what's so wild about this whole situation is that a little bit later on, she was invited by a friend to come to Kenya because that particular friend had, I think, a house in Kenya. Keep in mind, this was when the British still ruled. And so I'm guessing it had something to do with that. And so, of course, Jane hears an invitation to Africa and she is all in. There's just one teeny tiny little problem. She has no money. So she keeps working as a secretary until she decides, I need to make even more money. So she moves back home so that she has no rent and works really, really hard as a waitress. And she said what was interesting about this experience as a waitress is that it was her first experience working with another culture, because all of the other wait staff were, she said, more professional wait staff. She was kind of the young one doing this temporarily. They were all professional wait staff and they were all Roman Catholic. And that was not her background or upbringing. And at first, she was not part of the group. She was younger than the rest of them. They all felt like she was just going to run off with boyfriends and ditch her or ditch them, whatever. And she said she really had to, earn their trust slowly to finally be let into the group, which I just have to say is a bit of a foreshadowing into how she was later on able to gain the trust of the chimpanzees in Africa. Because later when she's in Africa, she said that it took her about 4 months for a chimpanzee to finally let her even observe them. Before that, the second they saw her, they would all run away and hoot and holler. And so it's funny that even her experience as a waitress, doing something that she really didn't want to do, but just for the sole destination of getting to Africa, buying that plane ticket, but it actually taught her patience to earn the trust of those in an environment or culture outside of your own. So that already, I love when you can look back at a life story and see all of the perfect threads, the things that made so much sense, but you didn't know it at the time. So she works as a waitress for 5 months, really, really hard, makes enough money, buys a plane ticket to Africa. She goes to Kenya, meets her friend, and her friend says, hey, I know you love animals, wildlife. You should meet this professor, or I suppose he was a professor. His name was Dr. Leakey, and he was at the time the director at some national history museum in Nairobi. And she went to meet this Dr. Leakey, and this is the wildest part, my friends. So stay tuned. So she meets this Dr. Leakey, she's explaining her crazy passion for wildlife and that her whole life she's just wanted to study animals in Africa. And he said, oh, wow, well, I don't know if you have any background in this or interest or the ability, but I actually just lost my secretary/personal assistant 2 weeks ago, and I'm looking for a new secretary, but, someone that has some experience and skills in the secretarial realm. And Jane, oh my gosh, her jaw dropped. She said, I'm in. Remember that secretarial course that I took? Yeah, this is perfect and so meant to be. So she takes this personal assistant job with Leakey. And the wild thing is that, when we think of Jane Goodall, we think of her and the monkeys, her and chimpanzees. She said she didn't discriminate against animals. She didn't have, a favorite animal that happened to be chimpanzees. She would have studied anything in Africa. She said she would have studied rats or mice or snakes, literally any wildlife. But it was because Dr. Leakey had chosen chimpanzees as his focus that became her life's work. So she started going out into the jungle, observing the chimps. And as I mentioned earlier, it took her 4 months to finally be let into their circles. And she still remembers to this day the very first moment when she was let in. She was watching from afar with her binoculars, slowly getting closer to this one chimpanzee she could see. And she sees the chimpanzee use this, what was it, a stick? Oh, I know. It was a leaf from a tree, and they had plucked off kind of the green leaf part, the paper part, if you will, and kept the stem. And they went over to this termite mound, stuck the stem into one of the termite holes, and proceeded to kind of move it around in circles, maybe to get some termites on there. And then they pulled out the stem with all the termites on there and started gnawing them off. And in that moment, this was news back then. This was completely new to the world of science. But Dr. Jane Goodall, who was not a doctor then, learned that chimpanzees use tools. So at the time, it was a common scientific belief that humans were the only species on Earth that were capable and intellectual enough to use tools. And she found that to be entirely false on the first, I don't want to say real day of her observation, because she'd been observing for 4 months, but that was the day when chimpanzees allowed her to get close enough to see something like that. So that was a really moving moment for her. And at this point, she's observing the chimpanzees, she's doing this work with Dr. Leakey, and he decided, hey, I really want people to take you seriously. I think you need to get a degree. And he said, without even giving her an option, he said, I got you a spot in Cambridge to get a PhD. And she said, I haven't even gone to university. I don't have a bachelor's degree. And he said, I know, but I've seen your passion. I've seen your work ethic. You're getting a PhD. People have to take you seriously because you take yourself seriously. This is very important to you. So she goes to Cambridge, in her young or early 20s, and gets a PhD without a college degree. And she said that the professors constantly, I guess you could say, berated her for anthropomorphizing these animals that she had observed and the animals that they were working with in labs. That she would give them names, and the professors would say, no, you don't name them, you give them a number. And she said, but can't you see they have such unique personalities? But at that time in science, there was a belief that animals did not have unique personalities like humans do. There was a belief that animals were nowhere near as intellectual or curious or smart as humans are. And Jane was inherently of a different belief. And it was actually from when she was 10 years old. She had a dog named Rusty, and she loved that Rusty had this very unique personality. She could get that sense. And it was actually when she was 10 years old, before any of this Africa stuff had ever happened, that she decided animals are unique beings, just like humans are unique beings. So it's interesting to me that even when she went to Cambridge and was studying in this highly, renowned and well-respected university, getting her PhD, that the professors thought she was kind of silly. And she said, you're wrong. And so even in the face of, academic intellectual certainty, she stayed true to herself. She knew who she was. She knew what her experiences had been. She knew her beliefs, and she would not let anybody sway them. And I think that is the way that we should all be, that we should stay true and authentic and genuine to ourselves and our hearts and our ideas. Don't let the world squash that belief in innocence and magic and good in the world. And the more we keep that alive and strong, the more it spreads. Because now, look at where we are with science and wildlife now. We all believe that animals have unique personalities. Many of us have spent countless hours watching funny animal videos on Facebook. And it's only because we know they all have such a unique and goofy personality. We've all seen elephants do silly things with humans, and cats do ridiculous things. Dogs, if you have a dog, oh my gosh, Like every dog, every cat, they're all different. So I just love that staying true to herself and that being a big part of kind of her manifestation journey, if you will. That for all of us, when we stay true to who we are, when we keep our dreams alive, when we continue to go in the direction of our dreams, and we don't let anyone tell us that we cannot do it, then it becomes possible because we believe it's possible. And if you believe something is possible and keep walking in the direction of it, how will you not arrive at that destination eventually? Just as Jane's mother told her, if you work hard, take every opportunity you're given, and you never give up, you will get there. There is actually no other opportunity or chance to fail. So I love that was a theme over and over again. I also love that people would tell Jane when she was, studying in the jungle for years, they would say, oh my gosh, Dr. Goodall, you were so brave to go into the jungle as a young woman. I mean, that really took a lot. She would say, I wasn't brave. I was living my childhood dream. And so I just loved that because, for her, it wasn't really even a choice. It wasn't, I'm going to be this brave, courageous woman and do this really scary thing. It was all she had ever wanted to do. And I think many of us have dreams. Pretty much any dream that is a dream for you is scary for someone else. So for me, having this podcast is a dream, but for someone else who might hate speaking in front of a camera, speaking in front of an audience, it's terrifying. To me, it's not being brave. It's just me living my childhood dream. And so, Jane coming in with the constant mic drop moments. I literally loved her, if you can't get that sense so far. So one other aspect of this journey that I wanted to tell you about is people also asked her, when you went into Africa, you were starting out as a researcher. And decades later, when you left, you gave up research to become an activist. At that point, she had decided, I think this was maybe 1986, to give up research in the field to go around the world and write books and speak and create organizations that was more about advocacy and activism for the planet and animals than it was about research. And people said, how did you make that decision to give up research to go for activism? And once again, she said, you don't understand. There was no decision made. There was no choice available. It simply had to be. It was the only option. And again, if we let that wisdom guide our journeys, that I think when you are really aligned with what you're doing, there typically isn't even a decision to be made. For example, I don't feel like I even decided to start this podcast. I think I got to a point where there was no other option. I so wanted to do it that I would do anything it took to make my dream a reality. I never had to sit down and decide what to give up to make this happen. It just, when you want something badly enough, it happens. And for her, she had been doing decades and decades of research, but she started realizing that right on the other side of the African continent, that wildlife and habitat numbers, percentages were dropping year by year. And it really obviously saddened her and bothered her. And she felt there's no point in doing this research if we're going to be losing more habitat and wildlife year after year. I have to spread the message. I have to get the word out and bring more people in to do good. So something that I once heard actually from Reese Witherspoon, another wonderful speaker, is that if your dream does not involve others, you're not dreaming big enough. And so clearly that is what Jane Goodall thought as well, that she had to bring the work outside of herself and her own interests and curiosities of studying wildlife and bring it to the world and teach them how to do good for the animals and the planet, our only home, the only home we will ever know. So that was a little bit about her journey. So to sum up so far, we started with magic. Then we went to mother. Then we went to manifestation journey. Now we'll talk about another M, mammals. And when I say mammals, it's actually a little bit about animals and some things that she taught us, stories that might move you to tears. It did for me. It's not just mammals, actually. It's all animals, but I wanted to keep with the theme of M's. So first things first, she was asked the question of, what is your favorite animal? Is it chimpanzees? And she said, no. She said, chimpanzees aren't animals to me. They're too much like humans. She really feels like chimpanzees are not animals. Her favorite animal is a dog. And, you know, a lot of that is because of her own dog and how her dog introduced her to the idea that all animals have unique personalities. So to this day, she's a huge dog lover. She said it's actually woman's best friend, not man's best friend. She was very adamant about that. But when she was talking about how human chimps are, there were these two stories. Well, one story and one video that I'll just explain to you that actually brought me to tears. So the first, she was talking about when she had left Africa as an activist, as an advocate, and she was learning about the medical labs that used chimpanzees to study certain medicines, healing modalities, and they were really horrible living conditions for these chimpanzees. I mean, already it felt heartbreaking and unethical to her to even see these animals being used for research, for medical research. But when she saw the living conditions, it completely shattered her heart. So she went into one of these laboratories one day and she saw that these chimpanzees, which, as she said, is our closest living relative. So imagine yourself for a second, or your sister, or your father, or your brother, staying in a 5-foot by 5-foot cage day and night for an entire lifetime. Okay, so that's what she went in. That's what she saw. And she walked up to one of the cages. She saw that the chimp's cage had a little name tag, and it said Jojo was the name of the chimp. And she knelt down and she looked to Jojo in the eyes and she just said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so, so sorry." And she started, crying underneath her mask. And the chimp actually stuck her fingers out through the cage and wiped away Jane Goodall's tears. And Jane said in that moment, not that she'd even needed more affirmation, she knew that chimps understood it all. They were not blind to anything we were doing, using them for. They know just as much as we know. And she said, in fact, most animals do. Animals are far more intelligent and understanding and sentient than we could ever even believe them to be. So that was one story where little Jojo wiped Jane's tears, which you would almost think it's the other way around, and that's the sweetest thing. Another story was actually from a video she showed us. She explained that eventually, later on, I think she was working to help start some chimpanzee sanctuaries for chimpanzees who had been harmed. And there was a sanctuary where this young baby girl chimp named Wunda was brought to camp so that she could be healed by the veterinarian there. And they actually named her Wunda because in that local language, it means near death. And her mother had been shot and killed, and Wunda had also been wounded by the bullet. And so she gets there, she's nearly dead. The vet is working on her days and days and days, and finally gets her up to a level where they know she'll survive. And so she stays there for a while. And after being in their care for, I honestly don't know how long it was. I don't know if it was months, maybe a few years. I believe she had grown up a little bit at this point. So let's say a couple years. Finally, she's at a point where they said, okay, we can, allow her to roam free in the sanctuary. She no longer has to be in our medical care, bringing her up. And so they bring Wunda into this little cage. They drop her off in the sanctuary and they start filming right as they open up the cage door. So you see the door open and you see Wunda run out of the cage just a few steps, and she's looking around as if she's seeing the world for the very first time. She's seeing the greenery and she's hearing the scents or hearing the sounds of the bugs, and she can smell real life nature again. Real life nature. And so you can see this moment of just her wonder and her awe and her curiosity. And what you would imagine is that at this point she might run off into the forest and that's it. That's farewell to Wunda. But no, she turns right back around, climbs back up onto the little box, the cage that had brought her there, and she just sits there for a little bit with her people. Because at this point, Jane, the vet, some of the other employees had become Wunda's family. They were all she knew. And so there was this moment of humanity where she's sitting there with her people and, you know, she's kind of looking at all of them, taking them in maybe one last time. And next thing you know, she turns to Jane and she wraps her arms around Jane and gives her a big hug. And I mean, at this point, Jane is like practically sobbing because it was such a beautiful moment. And so Wunda gives her a big hug as a thank you for bringing me home. And then she walks off and, you know, Jane and the vet are staying with her at this point. So they're wandering with her through the jungle. And I just loved hearing these stories because, as I mentioned, you know, for the animals that we have in our life every day, cats, dogs, lizards, whatever, we know that they have this personality and we know that they understand when we leave home to go on a trip and they're sad about it, and we understand the joy they feel when we come back home. But to see that in these wild species around the world is a whole other thing. And we realize that we're really not that different after all, and that we're not on any different level than they are. And I could go on and on, but I wish you could see the video because I was a mess. The entire auditorium was a mess. So I loved that. And then at the end, she was showing off her stuffed animals because she has this small group of stuffed animals that I think she has on her bedside table all of the time, or at least I had read that after the event. So the first one, each one symbolizes something. So the first one is an octopus. She said the octopus symbolizes animal intelligence because the octopus is by far the most intelligent creature on the planet. She said that octopi, I'm not actually sure how to say that, plural. The octopus has a brain in the body, but there's also a brain in every single limb. And each limb can operate independently from the rest of the body. I mean, literally controlled by its own brain. So she said the octopus is incredibly intelligent. I mean, I actually read a book about how they can solve puzzles and they can get themselves out of their like container in aquariums. They're so brilliant. She actually said that she thinks the octopus is the closest thing we have to an alien in terms of intelligence. So I loved that. Then she moved on to the rat, and she said this also symbolizes animal intelligence, but there's a little bit more to the story. She said that there are, I think they're called poaching rats in Africa. They're so smart. They can be trained to sniff out TNT underneath the ground, but they can also sniff out rhino horns, elephant tusks. That's why they're called poaching rats. They can essentially find where poachers have been, and then they can, you know, find them and arrest them. And she said they're so smart. And she said the only reason why we even think of rats as pests is because we leave way too much animal waste around when we should be not wasting so much food. And so they are wildly intelligent and just take advantage of it. And so because of our food waste, they've been able to multiply and multiply and multiply. And so she said, this is not a them problem. This is an us problem. So I love that even for what we might think of as just a pest. They are so wicked smart. They're actually using us. Probably much like Central Park pigeons. Those things are fat because they know people are leaving food everywhere. So far you have the octopus and you have the rat. Then you have the cow. And she said the cow symbolizes factory farming and how happy cows are with their calves when they are roaming in the field, eating the grass they were meant to eat as opposed to the grain they're forced to eat. She said, animals are meant to be left in their natural habitat and not factory farmed and eaten in these incredibly high rates and frequencies. And so she was definitely encouraging the audience to eat more vegetarian and vegan food and really think of our animals as our friends. So friends, not food. But we all have to do the work. We have to take the steps necessary to cut down on greenhouse gases and to be kind to animals and to help our fellow neighbors. And it will create the world that we've all dreamt of. So that was the cow. And now moving on to the chimp. She had a chimp that she named Mr. H because there was a man that she met, Charlie Horn, who had become blind at the age of 21 in the Vietnam War. And when he came back from the war, people told him that his dreams of becoming a magician were completely unrealistic. I mean, at this point, Charlie, you're blind. Like, pick a new dream. And just like Jane, he refused to let anyone tell him that he could not make his dream a reality. So he became a magician and toured the world teaching children to always shoot for their dreams and to accept nothing else as their destiny. So she said she just loves that, and that the chimp is meant to symbolize the indomitable human spirit. And that is actually one of her 3 reasons that she gave at the end, her reasons for hope. Why she still has hope that we can heal the world and work together in perfect unison and harmony. The first is that indomitable spirit. She said terrible things happen every day to humans, to the planet, to animals, and we get through it. When this 21-year-old Charlie Horn becomes blind, he says, I'm not going to let this change the trajectory of my life, at least in a negative way. I am going to continue to shoot for my dreams and not listen to the naysayers. And so she said that spirit is what keeps her hope alive, that there is still a huge possibility and potential for us to save each other, the world, and the animals. So the second reason was children. She said that watching young people and children gives her immense hope. She actually has an organization called Roots and Shoots, which is the cutest name. She explained why it's called that. She said that when a tree, seed starts sprouting, it shoots out what are called roots and shoots. And she said that they are so strong, even though they're so small and narrow and seemingly weak, that they can actually burst through rocks and push down concrete walls. So to make that tree grow, it will push through anything in its way. And she said she feels that is true, that spirit is there in young people. They inherently want to help the world, and they don't want to hurt animals, and they want to make sure that their friends are okay and that people are doing well. There's this inherent love of good deeds, I think, as a child. And she said they really give her hope because they are the roots and shoots. They will break through every obstacle that we have put in their path. They will save the world that we have left for them. And so that brings her immense hope. And she even shared this quick story. She said that she was speaking to a group of CEOs recently, And that one of the CEOs pulled her aside after and said, hey, Jane, I'm really hoping to make my company a little bit more sustainable and, eco-friendly. And she said, of course. And she said, do you mind if I ask why? And he said, 2 reasons. He said, the first is that, customers are asking for this. Actually, they're not asking, they're demanding more eco-friendly products and ethical business, structures, whatever. So he said, that's one, customer demand. He said, but the second, I gotta tell you, my 10-year-old daughter came home from school the other day and said, Daddy, we learned in school today that a lot of companies do things that are bad for the planet. You're not hurting the planet, are you? And he said in that moment, he thought, oh, shiz, I've got to make some changes. So she said, children really are gems in this world, that even a child's coming home from school and saying, Mommy, why do we do it this way? I heard that it's actually healthier or better if we do it this way. That, children are often our greatest teachers, and that they remind us of that joy and that vibrance and that innocence, that good nature that we're all inherently born with. So that was the second reason for hope. So you have the indomitable human spirit, you have children, and then she said the last is human intellect and collaboration. She said if we can send a man to the moon and we can store data in a cloud, which she always thought was just where rain was produced, then we can do anything. She said the key, though, is that we do it together, because when we work in silos, we end up creating other problems to the solutions that we've just created. She said, for example, electric cars are far better for the environment, except that now we are digging up the entire earth trying to get enough lithium to create the lithium batteries for electric cars. So she said by working in the silo, it's actually created a secondary problem. So she said using our intellect, but more importantly, working together. So going back to that quote earlier of, if your dream doesn't involve others, you're not dreaming big enough. So get others involved in your dreams and your visions and bring it to life as a team. My dad always said life is a team sport. So if we work as one, we remember that we really can live in this beautiful, perfect balance and harmony and communion. So that was the Jane Goodall event. I hope you had some takeaways from this episode. I mean, I came away incredibly inspired, teary-eyed, all of the feels and the dreams and the emotions. A few last takeaways that I had written down in case you want a little reminder. I said, go for your dreams no matter what, and don't let anyone tell you you can't, because they will believe that until you show them that you can. The second is, she said, don't be afraid to change course. I mean, even for herself through her own journey. She went from secretary to waitress to researcher to activist to author to speaker. She's done so many things. And she said, never be afraid to follow your heart and change course. Next, she said, she didn't say this, but I'm taking this away from how she behaved, have a sense of humor about life. I mean, at the end of the speech, there was a little Q&A portion, and she actually asked to have whiskey brought out because she said that whiskey just coats her throat when she's overused her voice. And so this 89-year-old woman is sitting there holding her stuffed animals that she just introduced to us and drinking whiskey and laughing about this and that. So keep it light, my friends. We all need that reminder more often than we don't. The last thing, as she had said in her speech, is that when the people are doing well, when the planet is doing well, and when the animals are doing well, all of them, like we're all doing well. I don't know a better way to say that, but helping one is helping them all. So no matter what your dream is, if you have a passion for something human related, or a passion for the earth, or a passion for the animals, just work on your calling and your dreams, and it will inherently be good for the rest of the world. So with that, I will sign off and just really continue to soak in that Dr. Jane Goodall wisdom. She was remarkable in every way I ever thought she would be, and far more ways than I ever even imagined as well. So I hope you took something away from this episode. I'm really excited to see you next week. And as a reminder, if you could please rate and review this podcast on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, make sure to follow on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. It would mean the world to me, and I'm so happy to have you on this journey with me. Okay, friends, I'll see you next week. Bye.